Hello. It's been a while, but let's get right down to it. This channel has covered almost all of the mainline Pokemon games and a good chunk of the spin-offs as well. I've always loved the spin-offs just as much as the mainline games, but they were the good ones, you see, namely the Mystery Dungeon series, the Ranger series, and the one-off Pokemon Conquest. These are games I would unironically play in my spare time, and not just for the nostalgia. However, as much as I would like to wax lyrical about the greatness of those said games, I thought approaching the spin-offs from the other end could make for a fun video as well. This video is totally not because I'm pissed at Nintendo for suing Palworld over a bogus sphere-catching mechanic without battles. Absolutely not. So, we'll pull up 3 of the games that are less popular and are of similar price range on release. Well, I'm playing a bit fast and loose with the word similar here, but just play along with it, will you? And if you disagree with these games being called bad, be sure to let me know down in the comments. While you're at it, playing along with the algorithmic activities would also help the channel out a lot. Pokemon Dash. The game where we could take control of a Pikachu and only a Pikachu, and proceed to raise other Pokemon and Pika Pika all over their faces. In other words, we slide the stylus in the direction where we want the Pikachu to go, and try to finish first in an assortment of race courses. Well, I say an assortment, but we only have 5 cups with 5 courses each, so 25 courses in total. In each course, we would follow where the game places the next checkpoint until we reach the finish. In the first 2 difficulties, the checkpoints are predetermined, but in the hardest difficulty, we would have the freedom to scope out the course first and clear the checkpoints in any order we want. Aside from flicking the touchscreen and making the Pikachu dash, we do also have 2 other methods of transportation, the Pikachu air balloon and the Lapras ride. We can pick the balloon up from the ground and save them, so in the races, whether we emerge victorious or not would depend on how efficient we are in using the balloons and the Lapras rides. I wish I can say more about the core mechanics of the game, but that was as far as it goes, unfortunately. There are of course a number of varying terrain types and power-ups to make moving through different surfaces easier, but everything else would just come down to ultimately one thing: knowing the courses and maps really well. Without any further ado, let's go over what this game has to offer, and it starts with a regular GP. I can only assume the GP stands for Grand Prix. As mentioned before, each GP has 5 cups, and each cup has 5 courses. It started off quite nice, easy, and linear, and this GP doesn't really provide any meaningful challenges in the beginning. In the regular GP, your biggest rival would probably only be this Meowth. Actually, this Meowth is really annoying in all the GPs. The layouts of the course up until the Yellow Cup were still predictable in this difficulty, and the other Pokemon racing all had room temperature IQs. It was only at the Red Cup that the maps were starting to throw curveballs in terms of where we have to go, and that was mainly because we're unable to see where we're at, respective to the next checkpoint when we're riding the balloon. I think I was starting to feel how this could become really annoying in the harder difficulties, so I vented my frustrations on the Pikachu by pulling his ears and cheeks after every victory. Let's move on to the hard GP. Here was where the charm of the game wore off for me. The layout of the courses in the cups are the exact same, only with slightly different competitors, and one new environmental element introduced. And this wasn't fun at all. During our balloon rides, a strong gust of wind now blows, greatly affecting how we land after we get off the balloon. And this is where I started to really loathe the game. A couple of weeks prior to starting this recording, I fell off my bike and nearly shattered my dominant wrist, so getting through the hard GP was a bit of a pain. The flicking motions were a bit hard for my wrist. Nevertheless, we soldiered on and won first on 3 of the cups, save for the Yellow and Red Cup. While booting the Red Cup, I can just tell I wasn't going to have fun with it. I suppose this is where the game is really selling its concept though. You can't just carelessly land on every checkpoint you see. You'll need to know whether you'll be passing either a lava lake or a swamp to get to the next checkpoint, so you'll have to land accordingly to get the terrain power-up beforehand. And this is where I was constantly overshadowed by this blasted Meowth. This bastard just managed to appear on all of the checkpoints before I do. If I recall correctly, this Red Cup took multiple tries to beat, and they weren't very fun on the wrist. It took a while to memorize the course and plan the routes. We ended up getting second again for the Red Cup, but that was alright. It was enough to unlock the Expert GP, introducing us to the Expert rules. I mentioned it in passing before, but the Expert rules just basically mean that we're free to go through the checkpoints in any order that we want. We can scan the course beforehand with our balloons first and start the race with a good dive. I barely managed to get first on the Green Cup, and this is where I stopped playing the game. This was basically the whole game, barring the multiplayer. But the multiplayer was more or less the same thing. To get to this point, it took me about 5 to 6 hours of active gameplay. Frankly speaking, if it weren't for my wrist injury, I could really love this game, if it didn't exist. I'm not quite sure who the target market of this game was, and the release price of this game surely cannot justify the game. even if in some way, on this God's green earth, you love flicking your Pikachu over and over again until it finishes. If I had to rate this game would get as much as how you would want to rate a person whose face could only be loved by their mother. Out of 10. Pokémon Trozei, the first of its series, a match 4 game with extra steps. The art style comes right out of a mid-2000s cartoons playbook, and it's got quite the simple plot. We play as Lucy Fleetwood, an agent of Soul. We have been informed that Phobos Battalion, the game's villains, have kidnapped countless numbers of Pokémon, and it was up to us to save them. With the power of the Trozei Beamer, of course, also known as the Pokémon Match 4 gadget. There's a bit more to the gadget on the plot side though. The game tries really hard to tie the Match 4 mechanics with the plot. In the end, we have a bit of freedom with the Pokémon on the puzzles. We can shift the rows and columns around with the purpose of eventually getting 4 of the same Pokémon lined up together, horizontally or vertically. You can choose to start the game with the tutorials, and they give you prize coins after you beat them. Clearing normal missions also give out prize coins, only if you meet the minimum score requirements. We pretty much have to clear out these silos and storages, and we get a few cutscenes throughout the story. The storages and levels get more difficult progressively, and when you've cleared enough, you will encounter boss levels, 5 of them in total. They each reside in these things called the Phobos Mobile. Our first boss was General Buzz, and I have to say, I actually quite enjoy the soundtracks of this game. I wasn't expecting much, but this came out as a nice surprise. In the boss battles, we can stun them every time we get a match 4 and trigger a Trozei chance, and we just have to continue these process until we defeat them. The boss battles each have their own gimmicks, but General Buzz here doesn't seem to have much going for him. It's worth mentioning that once we get a match 4, we can match 3 and then match 2 instead of having to match 4 all the time. The way to get the highest score is pretty much getting a screen clear, which I was only able to do once or twice, I think. I'm not very good at this game. Once we defeat the bosses, they will crawl back to their designated spot and kind of just wait there. I'm not quite sure what they do after we defeat them. And this is pretty much the gameplay loop. Match 4, match 3, and try to chase any match 2s before the Trozei chance run out. We encountered the second Phobos Mobile not long after, and watched pretty much the same cutscene, only with a different color scheme. This is General Avery, and here we have to Trozei a bunch of flying-type Pokémon. Pokémon Trozei does have a time limit to the stages, with the critical period activating if we can't match 4 quick enough. If you fail to find something within the critical period to increase the timer, you'll lose the stage. There is no visible timer anywhere on the screen though, so you'll just have to feel your way through it. Just like how we felt our way through this blackout, another one of the general gimmicks I mentioned earlier. But from this stage onward, every boss would have this blackout gimmick. Next up was General Grok with the ground types, and it was just pretty much the same thing. And General Aquarella's Phobos Submarine too. The last general, Bangbaloo, specialized in fighting types? I can't quite tell with this one. It seemed like a good mix of fighting, normal, and a Rhyhorn. By this point, the boss levels take quite a bit of time to finish. They average around 8 to 10 minutes for me. They're not exactly hard, but it's just lengthy. With the defeat of Mr. Bang, Baron Phobos finally revealed himself with his Lunatone base rising out of the volcano. The cutscenes felt quite refreshing honestly, especially when you play this after Pokémon Dash. Oh god, Pokémon Dash. And lastly, the Baron Phobos fight. It took me 2 tries because the time limit seemed to be much shorter compared to the previous fights, so I had to turn off my second monitor content to actually try and beat the level. And remember what I said about the soundtrack being nice? Well, it is nice, but it's literally the only soundtrack you'll hear for the boss fights. There's one for the normal levels and one for the boss fights. The normal level soundtrack felt Persona-ish with its more acid jazz feel, so I can't complain. But it would be really nice if they made more. In any case, this seemed to be the whole game. Once you beat the main story and accidentally skip the ending cutscene like I did, you'll get to do the whole game again. This time with higher minimum scores as the post-game content. All in all, quite lazy post-game and gameplay cycle. I beat Mr. Buzz again just to see what was different, and it didn't seem like it was going to give me anything new. Looking back at it while writing the script, it's not like I didn't have fun while playing the game. I enjoyed it quite a bit actually. It was a good turn off your brain for a bit and let's scramble these Pokemon heads type of game. However, I personally don't think that the gameplay loop was worth its release price. I know this game has a sequel in Pokémon Battle Trozei, which I can probably take a look at in a future video. That game seems to be a bit more innovative in its mechanics, so maybe they took the Trozei formula and ran it well. I really don't know at the moment. I've never played the other Pokemon puzzle games. But if I have to give this game a rating, this game has infinitely more budget than the Suika game, yet is less fun. And I can't believe this was made by the same studio that made Colosseum and Gale of Darkness. Out of 10. Pokémon Rumble Blast. I chose this one because opinions on it were, or are, still rather mixed, and because of the fact that Rumble Blast was the first full-priced retail game of the series. Let's keep in mind that these two other Pokémon spin-offs from the 3DS era were also priced exactly the same. Pokémon Rumble Blast was released at the 5th generation, so the game does include all the Pokémon up until that point. We take control of these toy Pokémon in this game, battling through a number of stages. We have 2 moves that we can use, and while fighting through the stages we always have a chance of recruiting the Pokémon we defeat. Defeating Pokémon gives us money, and we can use the money for different things in the game, mainly on the gacha system for moves, or just purchasing specific moves for our Pokémon. And I think that covers most of the gameplay loop for this title, so let's talk about the story. That's right, this game has a proper storyline, unlike the 2 previously mentioned games. The game started us off with a Pikachu, explaining the mechanics of the game in the tutorial. The moves, Pokémon recruitment, switching Pokémon and all that jazz. At the end, we faced off against Zekrom and somehow fell off this tower. Oh look, there's a Cobalion staring menacingly at the tower. We arrived at Toy Town, where we met Lillipup and Pawniard's gang. They explained the whole Battle Royale system and how we'll need to find strong teammates to be able to progress. We'll be able to heal our team with the glow drops from the fountain, so off we go to slap some wild Pokémon. This would pretty much summarize the flow of the game. Get through the dungeons and stages in an area, fight the boss Pokémon, and come out with stronger teammates. At the end of an area, there would be a Battle Royale arena, which you'll have to beat to progress to the next area. After beating the first area though, we found that someone had been stealing the glow drops, so our mission quickly changed. We had to go find whoever it was that stole the glow drops. The Battle Royale arenas differ each time, and some of them have a type restriction going in. At the end of World 1, after beating the 2-phase Battle Royale, we found that Toy Town's glow drops had all been stolen. Surprisingly enough, it wasn't Pawniard and his gang, it was a crocodile. All the games pointing to Crocodile as its villain is actually crazy. Then during a cutscene, it was revealed that it was actually Cobalion who stole all the glow drops, the supposed Pokémon of justice. We would go into the next chapters chasing Cobalion and trying to reclaim the glow drops that he stole from all the different towns in Toyland. And that practically sums up the story. I won't spoil it all for those who haven't played the game, but I do have all of it recorded. If I went over the whole game in this video, 70% of the video would be about Rumble Blast. In any case, there are 2 other types of battles in the game, unlocked as we progress through the story. The first one is team battles, where we carry a flag to include 2 other teammates, and we battle through a series of boss sequences. This would usually happen right after we finish all the dungeons and arenas in one area. The other type of battle is the charge battle. This would be introduced in Chapter 3. The charge battle is pretty much a button mashing minigame, where it would take a number of your strongest rated Pokémon and add their battle power together. The higher the total, the easier the button mashing minigame. Although to this point, I'm still not quite sure how to exactly mash the buttons for this. Do I mash A, twist the stick, or do I do them together simultaneously? I went with the latter every time just in case and managed to win all of them. This game also features the password system that recurs in every other 3DS game, but I didn't use most of them. I only tested a couple to see what it would look like. I do wish I recorded this live though. I was really amused by the final boss of the game. That definitely took me by surprise. But all in all, this was quite refreshing to play. Or I don't know, maybe it felt refreshing to play because I would rather play anything else other than Pokémon Dash. I found the gameplay loop repetitive, sure, but it was one of those loops that I didn't mind playing over and over again for a while. If I was stuck in a long haul flight, I wouldn't mind sitting down and going through the post-game. Again, this is all very subjective. I am someone who likes the older Dynasty Warriors games, and just generally the Musou series, so maybe I'm quite brain dead already. I would say that the biggest downside of Pokémon Rumble Blast is the fact that you can't improve the Pokémon you've already got. It makes it very hard to get emotionally invested in one team member, because you'll pretty much come across a stronger Pokémon in the next dungeon, and will have no need of your favorite Pokémon after using it for only half an hour. Take this Tornadus for example. I like its movesets and movement speed, but I was only able to use Tornadus for less than an hour before it being obsolete. There are pretty much no amounts of money and resources in-game that would enable us to make this Tornadus stronger. For a franchise built upon finding a perfect partner and friend, I do feel this missed the mark substantially. And if I had to give it a serious rating, this would probably be a good 6 to 6.5 out of 10. I wouldn't die for it, but I wouldn't throw it under the bus either. This was a bonus bit, but one of the other games I tried was the WiiWare Mystery Dungeon. This game was pretty charming in its own right. There wasn't much in terms of dungeons and Pokémon variety, but the difficulty sure held its weight. It was fun getting through the enemies and figuring out what to do, as well as experimenting with the stacking mechanics. I know this game wouldn't be for everyone, but hardcore fans of the Mystery Dungeon series might like it. The game's not very long either, so it could be a nice and short time sink. Let me know if you enjoyed this video or if you didn't and would like to see me do other things. Leave your suggestions in the comments below. I have another jazz cover planned and in the works. Hopefully I'd be able to get that out soon. I am also thinking of getting back into streaming, but I'm quite torn between staying on YouTube to stream or going back over on Twitch. It might be nice to keep my two content separate. I typed this script with my wrist still recovering. It's been about a month plus since I fell, but my range of motion still isn't back, and I still can't put any weight on my right palm. It's honestly quite worrying, but I hope it will recover well. If you had a similar injury, let me know how the recovery process went. Otherwise, I'll stop yapping, and I hope you'll have a great rest of your day. Take care.